All right. Happy Monday, everybody. Beautiful day. Finally feels like a little bit like summer, which I love. The week actually looks amazing. I hope you had a great weekend. I feel like we're quickly kind of coming to an end. We only have 3 weeks left, which is crazy. I hope you're all well. And really the focus this week is to try to finish, this week and next week is to finish the book so we can have it taken care of in time for the year to end and to get books back. I realize that I believe AR is due May 24th, which is a Sunday. I'm going to give you till the end of next week, so you're able to take the test on chains. I know some of you have read ahead and you finished the book, and that's great. You can go ahead and take the test, but if you are waiting and you're reading along with me, I don't have a problem if you extend your AR till next Friday. Let me just check the date. Next Friday's date that would be the 29th. And then that will end AR, which for you guys, it's ending AR forever. So that must make you very happy. I know some of you are not always a fan. So let's do a review, chapters 32 to 35. So when we left off was the tragic fire that struck New York, which I had shared with you was an actual true event that occurred. So approximately 500 homes were destroyed and thousands of people were left homeless because of the fire. They referred to the area in New York where it occurred as the burned over district. The Patriots kept saying that it was God's judgment on the British as to why this happened. The British soldiers felt that it had happened on purpose, or it was done on purpose to try to push them out. So they were searching for arsonists. They ended up hanging about a half a dozen people just on suspicions. And then they found Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was a school teacher, but he also admitted that he was in fact a spy, but he did not start the fires. They didn't believe him and they hung him anyway. In the commotion of the fire, Isabel lost Ruth's doll, which really kind of set her back. It was that one thing she still had. So she was really saddened by that. So she referred to that the bees were swarming in her brain pan again, which kind of indicates that when she's struggling to kind of get through something. So, but in all of that, Lady Seymour, if you remember, also ended up injured, and they didn't know it was wrong. So they had a doctor come see her, and it appears that the left side of her body suffered from a stroke. Madame Lockton gets very upset because Master Lockton wants his aunt moved to their bed chamber so she can recover and be more comfortable, which doesn't make Madame Lockton happy at all. Once again, he gets his way. Isabel is kind of in charge of tending to Lady Seymour, who is extremely grateful for all that she did for her. She essentially saved her life, but she also saved some things that were very special to her, including a picture of her husband. Because of the fire, British soldiers needed a place to stay. So 11 soldiers end up moving into the Lockton home with their wives. So it becomes very chaotic. But in a kind of odd way, Isabel is grateful because the wives help her with the cooking and the cleaning. And so she's not so overwhelmed. Unfortunately, going into chapter 33, fall's coming into play. The fire, because of the fire, it has also created food costs to double and triple. So people are starving. It's not affecting the Locktons in any way, but the loyalist refugees end up being kind of forced out of their homes, and they end up moving or they're forced to find shelter in what they refer to as Canvas Town. Canvas Town was the new name for the burned over district, and it was referred to that because they basically slept under canvas tarps. That was their shelter. Lady Seymour is continuing to get stronger. Excuse me. Isabel's kind of responsible for walking with her outside. It's something she enjoys doing. So because of that, Lady Seymour ensures that she has proper clothing. She actually has a warm coat made for her, and different items so she is comfortable, which obviously Isabel is very grateful for. On one day, Isabel goes up to get water from the tea water pump. She hears a commotion and she watches as American soldiers are being led to the Bridewell prison by the British. And it's here that she catches a glimpse of Curzon and realizes that he is a prisoner. In chapter 34, Isabel and the other wives are responsible. They're throwing a very large dinner party at the Locktons with some very important people. And during that party is when Isabel actually overhears the conversation about what they're planning on doing to the prisoners. And a lot of it is surrounding that they're just going to kill them, starve them. Lady Seymour kind of insults some of the soldiers and says that they should be treated well because the Americans have some of the British soldiers, some of their soldiers as well. She kind of insults them and kind of, plays them to be fools, which Madame Lockton wasn't happy about. But Isabel starts to realize that she is very concerned for Curzon, and she has to figure out a way to go see him to ensure that he is in fact still alive. So that evening, when they're cleaning up, she kind of gets the idea to save the table scraps from the dinner. She hides them. And 3 days later, she carefully makes her way to the prison. She tells the guard that she's Curzon's sister and that she has table scraps because her mistress, who she works for, feels bad for the prisoners and wants to bring them food. The guard takes the food initially from her and takes what he wants, and she is allowed to see Curzon. When she first enters the prison, she is convinced that he is dead, but he is in fact alive, but he's in very bad shape. And he shares with her everything that he went through and how he ended up being captured. The guard returns the bucket of scraps. There's still food in there. And the soldiers who are all being held pass the scraps around to ensure that they all get something. And it's Curzon's sergeant who asks Isabel if she will become a messenger for them. And Isabel quickly says no, because she doesn't want to risk being hurt by the Patriots again, which is kind of what happened at the beginning of the book. And she is told that she has to leave, and she tells Curzon that she will figure out a way to come back and see him. So that is where we left off. So we are starting on chapter 36. I'm going to read 3 chapters in this video and then 2 in the next, so you are aware. Chapter 36, Tuesday, December 3rd to Friday, December 13th, 1776. Our private soldiers in your hands are treated in a manner shocking to humanity, and that many of them must have perished through hunger had it not been for the charitable contributions of the inhabitants. And this is General George Washington complaining to British General William Howe. Lady Seymour was struck by a fever whilst visiting up in Greenwich. She had to be carried to her chamber, her skin the color of an old beeswax candle. Dr. Destouge came to bleed her so that her bodily humors would go back into balance. When the bleeding was over, Madame saw the doctor to the door. I was dusting the grandfather clock in the front hall. Good sir, Madame said in a low voice, I wonder. I believe our aunt would recover faster at our estate in Charleston. She could sit in the sun for hours and breathe the healthful air. Don't you agree? The doctor's bushy eyebrows flew up in alarm. South Carolina is hundreds of miles from here over bad roads. Lady Seymour would be dead by Philadelphia, which was likely Madame's intention, I thought. The doctor pulled on his gloves and picked up his bag. I doubt she'll be well enough to travel until spring. I will call again tomorrow. He tipped his hat. Good day, madam. Lady Seymour's bell rang upstairs as the door closed behind him. Madam squeezed her lips together so tight I thought she had bit them off. Girl, she spat. Go see what she wants. By supper, it had been decided that I would tend Lady Seymour while she was bedridden. The master used his connection in the British High Command to secure extra firewood for the house, declaring that his aunt's bedchamber be kept as warm as the month of June. The heat of the room helped to bake the fever in Lady Seymour's blood and ease her cough. 'Twas warm enough that I could go about in stocking feet, which was a comfort, for my shoes had taken to pinching my toes something wicked. As she recovered, the lady took to reading all of the newspapers printed in the city. Whenever she dropped off to sleep, I would steal as many sentences as I could. Thusly, I followed the progress of the war, what was left of it. The flame of independence was sputtering and expected to burn out any day. The rebels had run out of ammunition, soldiers, and money. Mayor Matthews, him who plotted to kill General Washington, escaped from the rebel prison and returned to New York in triumph. The American Congress, frightened by the marching British, fled at Philadelphia and ran to Baltimore. Newport, in my home state of Rhode Island, fell to the British too. When I read that last bit of news, I was stunned. I had not spared a thought for Rhode Island for months. 'Twas several days before I could again sneak up to the Bridewell, toting sausages, crusts, and cheese rinds. The guard stole a few of the sausages and gave me only a few moments to conversate. It mattered not. Curzon was not feeling up to much talk. I sat on the stone floor and checked the hole in his leg. It was hot, but free of yellow pus. Conditions in the prison had eased some. Folks in town had donated enough blankets that there was one to be shared between every 2 or 3 men. The British promised each prisoner would receive 2 pounds of pork and hard-tack biscuit every week. They did not announce that the pork was often spoiled, nor that the men had to eat it raw, for there was no fire to cook it over. For my next visit, I saved my own helping of mince pie. I filled the bucket with potato scraps and mutton fat and put the pie on top. The guard took the pie as I had hoped. I loves a good mince pie, he said, as he unlocked the door to the prison, pie crumbs spilling from his mouth. Frozen bodies were stacked in the hall, waiting to be buried in the pits. The clothes had been taken from the bodies to keep the living soldiers warmer. I kept my eyes on the ground out of modesty. Curzon was still not in the mood for conversating, not even a little bit. I thought he looked feverish, but when I went to feel his forehead, he pushed my hand away. The men snickered at that. I took my empty bucket and left. Snow fell that night. Lady Seymour prepared an errand list for me the next afternoon. She had spent the morning gazing into the fire and had not taken any food. I made bold and suggested that she eat a biscuit with honey for her own good. You need strength to get through the winter, I added. She set down her pen, picked up her teacup, and sipped the hot cinnamon water. I thought it pleased you when I left so much on my plate. Ma'am, the more I leave behind, the more there is for you to take to the prison. She studied me so close I thought she could see my thoughts. That is where you've been taking the table scraps, isn't it? My head bobbed once, like a puppet's. Am I to assume you know someone confined there? I found my voice. Yes, ma'am. She sipped again and looked at me over the rim of her teacup. It is honorable to help a friend in need. How did you know? I blurted out. She folded the sheet of paper on the table. These are the items I would like you to fetch for me. Purchase the ink and newspaper at Rivington's, but not the books. He overcharges. Go to that shop near the baker on Hanover Square. Elihu said they haven't closed. I bobbed once and took the paper. Please, ma'am. I tried again. How did you know? Her gaze returned to the logs in the hearth. Take care how you go, Isabel. Many people think it is fine and Christian thing to help the prisoners. I do not think my niece is one of them. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. It started to snow whilst I was in Rivington's. The wind blew the snow direct into my face as I crossed the square, and I was grateful to step into the shelter of the stationer's store, for 'twas warm and dry inside, near peaceful, if such a word can be used to describe a shop. A jelly-bellied officer with thick spectacles was purchasing a tall stack of books from the man behind the counter. They were deep in their talk and appeared not to notice me. I took a slow turn around the shop, admiring the shelves heavy with books, business forms, proclamations from Parliament, and General Howe, slates, thick paper, quills, and sealing wax. The books called to me. My fingers itched to touch them. It had been months since I dug into the story of Robinson Crusoe. I glanced toward the counter. The men were arguing friendly-like about a fellow named Hume. They both had their faces planted in the same pamphlet. When I trod on a squeaky board, they did not even look up. I reached up to a bookshelf and flipped my way through the books standing at attention. The titles were near as long as books themselves. Treatise on the propagation of sheep, the manufacture of wool, and the cultivation and manufacture of flax by John Wiley, or Cato Major, or his Discourse of Old Age with explanatory notes by M.T. Cicero, or poems on various subjects, religious and moral, by Phillis Wheatley, and countless tracts containing sermons and advice. My fingers backed up. Mama told me about Miss Wheatley. She was kidnapped in Africa, sold in Boston, and wrote fancy poetry that smart people liked. She had visited London and England. She had been an enslaved girl, but she was a free woman. I took the slim book off the shelf and opened the cover. I had never read a poem. What if I lacked the skill? What if I were caught? Might as well throw myself in the river. Bang! The closing door startled me so I near dropped the volume. I quickly set it back on the shelf and approached the counter. Can I help you? Asked the young man who stood behind it. Yes, please, sir. I handed him the list. From the Lady Seymour. I hear she's been poorly, he said as he looked over the list. Yes, sir, but she is strong enough to sit by the fire now and has a powerful urge to read. He nodded. She's a good customer. I'm glad she's on the mend. He quickly assembled everything on the list. The letters of Lady Mary Wortley Montague, History of the Roman Republic, Volume 1, and the expedition of Humphrey Clinker, and pulled out a large sheet of paper to wrap them in. As he worked the scissors, he paused. You knew that boy, didn't you? Pardon me? He continued cutting. Bellingham's boy, red hat, quick talker. He creased the paper with his finger. He brought you here once in May, pointed to you out the window, convinced me to hand over 2 fresh-baked rolls, told me you were like to die from hunger if I didn't help. He smiled at the memory. I'm sorry, sir, I said. I didn't mean to take your food. He pulled off a length of twine. You didn't. One of the advantages of courting the baker's daughter is all the bread a man can eat. He had not yet commented on my looking at the books. I feared he might try and trip me up, get me to say something. I ought not, but saw no other choice than to be polite. I hope your lady is well, sir, I said. He concentrated on tying a bow. So do I. She fled with her father to a village in Pennsylvania, a place called Hatboro. They make hats there. Clever, don't you think? He tried to smile, but his eyes were downcast and melancholy. Perhaps 'tis safer there, I said. Ay, he said, finishing the bow, with plenty of young men eager to protect her, but that's a tale for another day. He kept the package in his hands, lost in thought. Master Lockton will settle his aunt's account at the end of the week, I said. Oh, ay. He gave me the package and waited as I settled it in my basket. I hear tell you're one of them who feeds the lads in the bridewell. The sizzling log in the hearth popped suddenly, and I jumped. Not me, sir, begging pardon, but someone is mistaken. He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. That there mark on your face makes you hard to forget, lass. The heat from the hearth filled the room, and it made it hard to breathe. My eyes darted to the windows, and I fought the urge to run. It felt like all of New York was watching me. He leaned forward, put his elbows on the counter, and lowered his voice. Though we were the only people in the shop, you tell them boys in the jail to hang on. There's plenty of us out here trying to help. Sir? He removed a slim volume from under the counter. This is for you. Don't let your mistress see it. I cannot read, sir, I lied. He snorted once as he quickly wrapped the book. Of course you can't. He pushed the package to my side of the counter. All who love liberty should commit the words to heart. I can't take it, I started. I cannot pay. I only have a few left in those I should burn, he said with a wave of his hand. Read it, pass it on, and keep feeding the lads. I bobbed once and hid the parcel in my pocket, under my apron. As soon as I could stand close enough to a fire, I'd get rid of it. The last thing I needed was more trouble on account of independence. Yes, sir, I said, hurrying for the door. Thank you, sir. He raised his finger to his lips in a last warning. Shh. Chapter 37, Saturday, December 14th to Monday, December 23rd, 1776. The distress of the prisoners cannot be communicated in words. 20 or 30 die every day. They lie in heaps unburied. What numbers of my countrymen have died by cold and hunger, perished for want of the common necessaries of life. I have seen it. This, sir, is the boasted British clemency. And this is a letter written from New York describing prisoners captured at Fort Washington. Lady Seymour regained her strength by the day. I was no longer allowed to spend warm hours in her bedchamber. She took her breakfast and dinner alone, but joined the rest of the company for supper each night. Madame was saddened by her husband's aunt's return to health. The next week passed in a kitchen storm of flour and sugar, for Christmas was fast approaching. Madame's list of required delicacies was endless: gingerbread, pies of brandied peaches and preserved cherries, and mincemeat, macaroons, blancmange, Jordan almond, sugar candy, as many kinds of cake as there were fingers on both hands. I was the dog's body in charge of keeping the oven stoked with wood and the ashes cleared out, fetching forgotten ingredients from the market and beating eggs 10 at a time till my arm was near to fall off. 2 of the soldiers' wives got into a terrible squabble the day the woodpile froze. Hannah told Mary it was her turn to fetch home the buckets from the tea water pump, and Mary said no, 'twas Hannah's turn. Back and forth they went, the words getting hotter as their tempers grew shorter. I went yesterday, Mary said loudly, as she poured boiling water into a basin. You know that for a fact because you told me my nose was the color of a cherry when I came in. Hannah shook her head as she scrubbed the floor. No, that was 2 days ago. Yesterday I slipped on the ice and fell on my backside, near broke my tailbone, I did. Could barely come up the steps this morning. You're a lying codface, you are, Mary said. Hannah threw the brush in the bucket and water splashed on the floor. Who you calling a liar? Sarah, the boss lady, came through the door just as Mary rounded the table, her hands balled up into fists. Sarah was getting close to her time and had a bit of a temper herself. She slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. Shut your gobs, she shouted. I'll report the pair of you to the colonel if you don't straighten up. There'll be no more brawling or caterwauling in this kitchen. But, they both said. Sarah leveled such a glare at the pair of them I thought their hair would catch fire, and I suddenly saw a way clear to my own purposes. Begging pardon, Miss Sarah, ma'am, I said meekly. What do you want? She said, her eyes still on the other woman. I can fetch the tea water, I volunteered. Mary shook her head back and forth. Oh, no, she won't. She'll tarry at the shops to get out of her own chores. Make one of the men do it, I say. I'm the first one to wake to build up the fire, I explained. The shops are still closed then. I'll dash up to the pump and be back before the sun comes up. Sarah gave me a suspicious look. Why would you take on extra work, special with it being so cold and dark in the morning? I was raised in the country, miss. Too much time inside makes me feel poorly. I like walking in the fresh air, even if it is cold. It was mostly a lie, but the tea water pump was right close to the prison. Fetching water would give me a chance to check on Curzon every day. Hannah picked up her scrub brush and knelt on the floor again. Let her go, I say. Saves us the trouble of freezing our tails off. She dipped the brush in the bucket. Don't know what possessed me to follow my Jimmy to this godforsaken colony. The next morning found me headed up island long before the sun rose. When I knocked on the guardhouse door of the prison, it was opened by a soldier I'd never seen before, a short man with black hair, sky blue eyes, and a scowl. You can't come in, he said, after I explained my errand. Regulations been changed. Tell her about the windows, called another soldier, warming himself by the fire. The regulations permit civilians to deliver food and sundry provisions. But not firewood, added the man at the hearth, yawning. But not firewood, repeated the first man. There will be regular patrols around the perimeter of the building to ensure that civilians do not tarry overlong in conversation with the prisoners. And we'll be checking on the grub you give them, said his companion. Guards will inspect all civilian donations, the first man said formally. If you deliver contraband items, you will be imprisoned yourself. I shivered once. Are scones and jam contraband? Not yet. Back outside, I walked around the front of the building, trying to figure where Curzon's cell lay. Some prisoners were already awake, their hands and arms wrapped in rags, sticking through the bars of the window. Curzon's cell lay to the back of the building. I rounded the corners and stopped. This was where the burial pits were dug. The pits were just a little smaller than the cells, dug down the height of a grown man. One of them had already been filled with bodies and covered again with dark mud. 2 lay open and empty, sprinkled with snow like sugar on a cake. I did not know how many bodies would fit in each. I shivered again and pulled my cloak tight, then turned my back to the graves and counted the windows. 2, 3, 4, until I came to the window I hoped led to Curzon's cell. The eastern sky had brightened enough for me to see all around, but the inside of the prison was dark. I stepped up to the building. The bottom of the window was just above the top of my head. I stood on tiptoe and stretched my hands up to the bars. Hello? I called in a hushed voice. Curzon? Anyone? The nasty fellow who had tried to steal my bucket on my first visit, Dibdin, leaned his face against the bars. He had a blanket around his shoulders and Curzon's hat upon his head. Won't let you in no more, eh? They changed the rules. Can you fetch my brother, please, sir? He's sleeping. I wanted to pull the bars apart, snatch the hat from his head, and thrash him with my fist and shoes, but that was impossible. I forced honey into my voice in a humble tone. Well, then, may I please speak to your sergeant? Sarge is dead. He turned his head and spat. I'm in charge now. I'll take the victuals you brought. I started to reach into the bucket to hand the scones through the bars, but stopped. How do I know my brother's not dead, too? Wake him up, please. Dibdin opened his mouth but closed it without a word. His hunger was stronger than his temper, it seemed. He turned to someone in the cell. Get the black boy over here. A moment later, Curzon appeared at the window. He was shaking so badly he could barely stand, his eyes half closed, teeth chattering. He had no blanket around him, and there were puke stains on the front of his shirt. His gold earring was missing, too. Curzon, Curzon, I hissed. What ails you? What can I do? He did not hear me or could not. He was insensible of his own name and where he was. Dibdin joined Curzon at the window. Terrible, ain't it? How fevers and pox tear through this place? There was hollow laughter in the cell. Give him his hat back, I said, in a blanket. Is he getting his rations? He did not answer me. That was an answer in itself. The prison was not a place of shared hardship anymore. It was a hole of desperation. You bloody beast, I swore. How dare you let him starve? The words flew out of my mouth without pause. Who are you to reprimand me, girl? He gnarled, putting his face up to the bars. His breath stank of rotting teeth and snot pooled at the edge of his nostrils. He's a slave. He will not be treated same as free men. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. But you can remedy that, he said, with ease. I tried to keep my voice steady. How so? Curzon was seized by a fit of coughing so violent I feared his ribs would crack. He choked on his spittle and fought for breath, then finally relaxed back into his stupor, leaning against the window. Dibdin glanced back at the other men in the cell before continuing. Our Captain Morse is on parole, lodged at the Golden Hill Tavern, we hear. Sorry, my dog's drinking water. Go there, tell him the men have fever and pox. One of our lads, Bridgebane, has a father in Piscataway with money and influence. If the captain can get word to him, Bridgebane's father could arrange for a proper physician to attend us here. Curzon coughed again and moaned. Sweat glistened on his forehead. And the doctor would see to my brother, I said. Dibdin hesitated, then gave a nod. And he gets a blanket with food? Dibdin said something to a man I couldn't see. A blanket appeared on Curzon's shoulders. Curzon clutched it around himself. And his hat? My voice was ice. Dibdin removed the hat and placed it on Curzon's head. Lay him down, he instructed, on the rushes, not the bare floor. Someone helped Curzon away from the window. I had no choice. I handed the jam-covered, burnt scones up to the window. Dibdin stuck the first one in his mouth, then passed the others to the men, who suddenly crowded the window. If he dies, you'll not see me again, I warned. Understood, he said. I found Captain Morse carrying out rubbish for the tavern keeper. He was a well-fed man wearing the brown coat trimmed with white that signified he was a prisoner of the war. There was a big gap between his front teeth, but they looked clean enough. He joined me in the shadows of the alley and listened as I quickly explained my mission. I'll try to get word to Bridgebane's family tonight. It is against all the laws of war to treat prisoners so badly. He paced angrily. How often can you stop here? Every morning. Good. Tell Dibdin I'll see what I can do to ease their suffering, though I fear it will not be enough. My brother is amongst the prisoners, I said. He's ill. Can I see to it that he's given his share of what Bridgebane provides? I surely will. Your brother was calm and brave during the final battle. He's a true soldier. The crow of a rooster interrupted him. The sun was fighting through the leaden clouds. I picked up the buckets. I have to hurry. He nodded. Thank you for your help. My apologies, but I do not know your name. I am called according to Madam. He smiled. Just Sal, then? Good day to you, Just Sal. Lucky for me, the overcast morn caused the other servants to sleep past their normal time. By the time Hannah and Mary staggered up from the cellar, I had the porridge bubbling and the tea steeping. I could not eat nor drink a thing, for my belly was tied up with fear. My thoughts chased around, but I had to visit the prison daily. Curzon's life depended on it. But someone would see me and was sure to remember the mark on my face. Word would get back to Madam, and she would tell Colonel Hawkins, and he would set someone to follow me, and Captain Morse would be flogged for passing on messages, and the prisoners in Curzon's cell would all be hung and buried in the pit. When I thought what they might do to me, I ran to the nursery and had me a good puking. But the next day I made my way up there again, food for the prisoners, water for the Locktons, and every once in a while a message to the gap-toothed man in the brown coat at the Golden Hill Tavern. A few nights later, there was a terrible hullabaloo between Madam and the master when he announced at a supper that he was planning to travel on the next ship to London. He would carry messages to Parliament, conduct his own business, and likely return to New York by summer. Madam was not pleased. First, she argued that he ought not go. Then she argued, yes, he should go, and he should take her with him. When he refused, she threw a goblet in the fireplace and carried on so loudly that the master and Colonel Hawkins finally called for the carriage and left for a tavern. Madam dozed herself with strong wine after that and went to bed. That night, the temperatures fell so far below freezing that the biggest fire could not keep away the chill. I moved my pallet as close to the hearth as I dared and sat with all my clothes, my cloak, and my blanket wrapped around me. 'Twas so cold I could not sleep. General Washington and his men were holed up in Morristown. Folks said they were in desperate needs of stockings and food. I could scarce credit how hungry men with frozen feet could win a war. They were fools to even try. I waited as the clock first chimed 11 times, then 12, watched the firelight and trying not to ponder. When I got up to add wood to the fire, my feet wandered themselves to the pantry, and my hands pulled the loose board there. Under the board were some sheets of newsprint I had saved, the lead piece from the lead piece, from the statue of King George, my seeds, and the book given me by the state, and removed the paper wrapping. I opened the cover. A fellow named Thomas Paine wrote the little book. He called it Common Sense. Mama always said that common sense was far from common. That's why it was so special when you found it. The first sentence in the book did not seem to contain any. Some writers had so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants and government by our wickedness. It took 4 readings to figure out the meaning, which I took to be that the life of folks is different than the world, what rules over them. Paine sure did dance a long time with the notion before he said it. I closed the book and longed for Robinson Crusoe, still stranded in the study. Watkins was asleep. I dared not rescue him. I opened the book again and attacked the next sentence. Chapter 38, Tuesday, December 24th to Wednesday, December 25th, 1776. Christmas is come, hang on the pot. Let spits turn round and ovens be hot. Beef, pork, and poultry now provide to feast thy neighbors at this tide. Then wash all down with good wine and beer, and so with mirth conclude the year. This was in the Royal Virginia Almanac. I spent the day before Christmas fighting a holly bush with a pair of scissors. Madam required its twigs and berries for her decorating schemes. My morning dash to the prison, pump, and tavern had gone wonderful fast. There were no new messages to pass from Curzon's companions to Captain Morse. Sorry about that. I'm going to start at the beginning of chapter 38 again. I spent the day before Christmas fighting a holly bush with a pair of scissors. Madam required its twigs and berries for her decorating schemes. My morning dash to the prison, pump, and tavern had gone wonderful fast. There were no new messages to pass from Curzon's companions to Captain Morse, and the doctor, secured by the rich Bridgebane family, had delivered potions and bleedings to all, as promised. Curzon was spending most of his days sleeping, but he was not dead, and it was Christmas Eve day. The holly bits were tied with pine branches and set on the sills of the street-facing windows. Glass bowls of red berries were set on small tables in the drawing room, library, and the front parlor. Madam had 2 soldiers hang a ball of mistletoe in the front hall. This provided great merriment amongst the men and some blushing on the part of their wives. I had never seen a house decorated with tree branches to celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus, but it did pretty up the place. The best was when Madame told us to hang dried rosemary throughout. That cut right through the lingering stench of boots and belchings. In keeping with tradition, I was to have Christmas Day free from work. I pondered hard on what I should do with so many hours for myself. Christmas at home had meant eating Mama's bread pudding with maple syrup and nutmeg and reading the Gospel of Matthew out loud whilst Ruth played in Mama's lap. I was miles away from celebrating like that. I tried to bury the memory, but it kept floating to the top of my mind like a cork in a stormy sea, and foolish tears spilled over. I finally decided to treat myself to a long stroll through all of New York, from the waterfront north to Chambers Street, and a side-to-side wander from the East River to the North River, which some had taken to calling the Hudson. For one day, my legs would be my own, not at the beck and call of others. On Christmas morning, Lady Seymour presented me with a new pair of black leather shoes that did not pinch any of my toes. Madame gave the soldier wives each a coin. She gave me nothing. When we returned home from the service at St. Paul's Chapel, Madame explained that my day off would begin as soon as I had finished serving the midday meal. Sarah had cooked it in advance, a sirloin of beef, smoked ham, onion pie, and a plum pudding for dessert. Master and Madame both filled up on the onion pie and hardly touched the fresh-baked bread. Lady Seymour ate enough for an undersized mouse. I ate porridge and beef for my Christmas dinner, a right curious combination, but a tasty one. As I cleared away the table, Madame informed me that my day off would begin after I brought in wood and washed up the dishes. Lady Seymour fired off a cannon blast of a glare at her, but Madame pretended not to notice, and the master kept his face planted in his newspaper. There had been heat rising between the two women for days. Madame was prepared to row the aunt to Charleston to get rid of her. After the meal, the master went to ordering the carriage to take them to some admiral's house for eggnog. Lady Seymour said she was going to rest and required nothing of me. As the lady limped to her chamber and the master disappeared down the stairs, I picked up the tray that held the last of the dishes. Madame poured herself another cup of tea. "One moment, girl," she said. I paused. "Yes, ma'am." Madame said nothing while she stirred the sugar into her tea. She sipped, wrinkled her nose, added another spoonful, stirred, then sipped again. She set the teacup in the saucer before her. I stood like a statue holding the tray. Would she take away the rest of my days? Force me to wash the table linens or starch the master's shirts? Madame gave her tea another stir. "You have been idling around the Bridewell prison." My heart stopped. She picked up a tart, considered its scorched bottom, and returned it to the plate. "My husband's aunt says that you visit the prison at her direction, bringing table scraps not good enough for pigs. She declared that forgiving and caring for the enemy is doing the Lord's work." My heart started up again, racing so fast I thought it might escape my body. Madame picked up a second tart and scratched off the scorched bits with her knife before taking a bite. She chewed, sipped more tea, and swallowed. "My husband's aunt is a blithering idiot who has completely lost her wits. You should have told me of her requests at once." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold as frozen coins. "You represent this house, girl. Your visits could put us under suspicion of having rebel tendencies. I will not be ruined by you, be it through innocence, as aunt proclaims, or insolence, which I suspect. I forbid you to go to that prison." My arms shook from the weight of the tray as well as her words. She could do anything, order me to the stocks, another branding, or a public whipping of hundreds of lashes. She could beat me herself. She could sell me as she had done Ruth, only place me with the cruelest master who'd worked me to death in days. A pearl of sweat trickled down my cheek. Madame finished the tart and wiped the corners of her mouth with her fingertip. "While my husband's aunt lives here, my hands are tied." She reached for another tart. "But she'll be soon gone, one way or another, and Elihu will be in England." She popped the entire tart into her mouth, chewed, then licked her fingers. "That is the day you should fear, girl." After the carriage left and dishes were washed and Lady Seymour was sound asleep, I started my free day, still trembling from Madame's threat. How could I get word to Curzon that I couldn't bring food any longer? Would Dibdin let him starve if I stopped being his messenger? What if I ignored Madame's rule and continued to visit the Bridewell? I walked block after block, pondering. I walked past the rope works and the brewery to the orchards on the east side, silent under the snow. I walked past houses that had letters, Gr. George Rex, carved into the front door, property stolen in the name of the king. Like Madame had carved her letters into my soul, burned the mark into my skin. She can do anything. I can do nothing. The ashes of sadness and the buzzing bees of my melancholy all spun a storm inside of me, and I walked and walked until my new shoes rubbed blisters all over my feet, and the blisters popped. I took off the shoes and walked in the snow. Once my feet were frozen enough, the blisters didn't hurt. As the sun ran for the west, rowdy songs started up in the taverns and groggeries. I found myself on the shore of the North River, just above the battery. Empty rowboats were tied up to a wharf. As the tide pulled out to the ocean, they bobbed and bumped against each other. A few lights twinkled across the water in faraway New Jersey. I thought of all the ancestors waiting at the water's edge for their stolen children to come home. Waiting and waiting and waiting. A thought surfaced through my ashes. She cannot chain my soul. Yes, she could hurt me. She's already done so. But what was one more beating, a flogging even? I would bleed her not, scar her not, live her not, but she could no longer harm Ruth, and she could not hurt my soul, not unless I gave it to her. This was a new notion to me and a curious one. A group of soldiers singing loud as they could swayed down the street, very, very muddy in drink. I hid in the shadows until they were gone, then headed back to Wall Street. I passed several houses filled with Christmas carols. Joy to the world, and I saw 3 ships in the first Noel. A fat candle glowed on a parlor windowsill of a house on a corner set there to guide someone home. The Locktons and Lady Seymour were all retired for the night by the time I returned. The house was still empty of soldiers and their wives. I built up the fire in the hearth, set my shoes and damp stockings to dry in front of it, and rubbed a calendula salve on my blisters. Christmas, Mama's voice reminded. Keep Christmas. For the second time on the very same day, tears threatened. I rubbed them away and vowed not to cry again. 'Twas a nuisance. I found myself studying the loaf of bread on the table. A sharp knife showed up in my hand, and the loaf was soon cut into fat slices. A chipped crockery bowl appeared from the pantry alongside the butter and the eggs and milk and sugar loaf and the nutmeg grater and the small amber flask. I baked me a maple syrup bread pudding in the Rhode Island style. While I cooked it, I cleaned myself up good and proper. I thought about stealing a piece of Madame's rose-scented soap, but that would have made me smell like her. I preferred to smell like strong lye. I washed my arms and legs and the back of my neck and my ears and my face, and I dried myself with a soft, clean rag. I frowned as I stepped back into my clothes. I'd grown some and they didn't fit proper. I'd let out the seams of the bodice as much as I could and taken out the hem of the skirt. Much more growing and I'd look a right scandal. But I wouldn't think on that now. I was trying to make a Christmas. I pulled on my dry stockings and stepped into my new shoes, even though they rubbed fierce on the popped blisters. I put the bowl of bread pudding into a basket, tied on my cloak, and wound up my hands in rags to keep the frost from biting. I walked out the back door. It was not yet midnight, so in truth 'twas still the day I could call my own. I set my path westward to the burned-over district, Canvastown. The line where September's fire had stopped was sharp cut. First a house with no damage, next a house still bearing black streaks of soot and smoke, then a field of ruin with makeshift hovels crafted from tent brick and scorched timbers. Rats nibbled on frozen garbage heaps. The smell of the fire still lingered, tainted with the smell of filth and decay. But in the bleakness, there were spots of hope. A wreath was stuck on the front of a tent. Children's clothes hung from a clothesline, stiff with ice, but still sweet-looking. A butter churn stood watch over a neat stack of fresh split wood. Smoke swirled slow from the top of a chimney, dipped at the roof line, then rose up to the stars. I lifted my face to the sky, and for the first time in much too long, I prayed. I prayed as hard as I could, without words or shapes or fancy talking. I just prayed. When I was done, I felt cleaner than I had after my bath. I walked on until I found a hut built against a lone brick wall. From inside came sounds of a family, the papa's low rumble, the mama's bright laugh, and giggling children who had been allowed to stay up much too late and who did not want to fall asleep. I greeted them through the piece of canvas that, served as their front door. The hovel fell silent, then the canvas was pushed aside and the father stepped out, a musket in his hand. His wife came right behind him, though he told her to stay inside. It took some convincing to explain my mission, but I spoke polite and firm and held out the bread pudding. And the children snuck out in their night clothes and just about dove into the bowl. The mother took the basket and said, "Thank you," and then, "Thank you again," and then, "Thank you most kindly," and they went back inside. I hummed a carol as I walked away, finally feeling at peace.